right in. So first of all, I will be asking you guys to answer some questions just to get some feedback. So if you see in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see the little attendee list. And in the bottom, there's like a little comment box that has a check mark in it. If you click on that, you should be able to see, options for yes, no, check marks. So if you guys can try and do that now, that will let me know that your feedback is working. You should have the ability to do that. I see a few check marks coming. Let's see. A couple question marks, feedback, yes, yes, yes. Yeah, so right next to the hands, there's a few people who are doing the hand raise. There's that second box that's called feedback when you hover over it. And it'll give you that yes, no check mark. Okay, I see a few people are going through there. Great. Okay, so as we go through, I'll just ask you to kind of participate a little bit. It'll help me out, and it'll keep it a lot more interesting for all of us. All right, so let's begin. We've got change management foundations. So what I'm going to do today is talk you through essentially what's some of the basis of the change management foundations course. There is a second level, the practitioner level, which is a more applied version of change management, but this is the basics. So we'll talk about what change management is and isn't. We'll go into why it matters. And then we'll talk about the course in the 4 sections it's divided into in the book. And I have my book right nearby. I'll grab it in a second. But basically, the book goes into 4 sections. So you've got change management and the individual, the organization, communications and stakeholder engagement, and the 4th section is change management practice. So that gets into sustainability and keeping your change management going throughout the years. Then we'll just end with a really quick summary and we'll go into the Q&A. All right, so our next slide, here we go. So what is change management? So a lot of people think that change management is just a technical term. Many of you in the room may have been through ITIL, you're familiar with that. But really what we're talking about with organizational change management is transitioning people. Now that can be an individual, a team, or an entire organization to a desired future state. So we're really talking about that people aspect and getting them to move forward through a change. Moving forward, let's see. Okay, so why does change management matter? A lot of people, I think, have given change management a bad rap. A lot of times it's looked at as a soft and fluffy approach. So how are people feeling? What are they doing? Things like that. Or we look at it as human behavior. So what do they want? What do they need? What is my staff thinking? And what are they experiencing as we go through a change? And sometimes I think we underestimate the power of good change management practice because of these perceptions right here. So what does it really matter to have change management? As you can see, there are articles quoted on here from Harvard Business Review, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and this stuff goes back a long time. These are from 2000 is even the earliest quote here. But really why change management matters is because change can take too long. You don't have people who are going along with you. As a leader, it can be so exhausting because you feel like you're pushing or you're pulling people along with the change instead of going through the change side by side. And then with that comes a lot of costs, not only in human resources. Sometimes changes cause you to lose legacy staff. And now maybe that affects the bottom line because you have less resources, but the knowledge they take with them is huge. And the more you can do to keep people engaged throughout a change, the more successful it's going to be. So really it matters because change management is going to hit your bottom line as an organization. It's going to hit that resources, hit your time, hit your projections, and really plays a crucial role, especially in big projects, to getting that ROI faster and a bigger ROI than you expected. So a lot of you have probably seen these 3. So people, process, technology. You can go ahead and give me a green check if you've seen this before. Yeah, a lot of green checks are coming up. So yes, people, process, technology. It's also discussed in ITIL. It's discussed in different project management, PMI. But when we look at change management, I always like to look at these 3 pieces. because so many of the changes that we experience today are technology related. So as organizations, quite often, we're very good at the technology piece, right? We know that we're going to something as simple as a new printer or something as complex as a new, customer management system. So we're really good at outlining what it takes to get that technology in place. Often, we're also very good at getting the processes in place, so a how-to guide or training, things like that, or how you use that new technology. But what we're not so good at is this people aspect. And what that is getting people comfortable in using that new technology. Oh, yeah, I got pink. Wow, it's my lucky day. Yay. Process, the people plays right into the process and the technology side, and you really need to be focusing on getting those people motivated all the way through. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So that leads me right into the first section, which is change and the individual. This section is all about explaining to you how individuals are experiencing change. Now, this is not a new concept, okay? This is old, tried and true. Organizations are not the only things that go through change. Now, many times I hear people tell me, I'm not good at change. I don't like change. And I remind them that we do this every single day. We adjust to change. And an organizational change is no different. It all consists of this basic thing. So go ahead and give me, I think there's a smiley face, a little laughter guy. Give me a smiley face if this looks familiar to you. If some of these words seem familiar to you. Yes. Okay, so this was designed, this is the change curve by Kubler-Ross. And it was designed in 1969. You've got that down here. But really, a lot of people say, well, Veronica, that looks just like the 5 stages of grief, right? You've got denial and anger and acceptance. And absolutely, it is, because a change is a loss. And it's important as we go through a change to recognize that an individual will go through all of these changes, no matter how simple that change may be. So I'll give you a quick example that I like. Let's say you've got the perfect day planned. You are going outside, whether it's a hike or a picnic, like this is what you're doing, and it's going to be amazing. And you wake up and someone says to you, hey, Veronica, it's raining. You can't do your perfect picnic. Your first response is going to be, what? Shock, right? No, it's not raining. Go into denial. You don't believe them, of course, so you must check it out yourself. So you rush to the window. It can't be raining. No. It can't be raining. And there it is. And now you're upset. Maybe you're blaming yourself. I should have had a backup plan. I don't have a backup plan. I can't believe it's raining. This is going to ruin the entire day. No one will be able to make it. Well, okay. Now you're back. You're moving through this. Man, this was all my fault. I should have planned for something else. I should have checked the weather. I should have done something different. Maybe it will change. Maybe I'll just pray for sunshine. It'll happen. I know it will happen, right? You go through that, and maybe you go back to denial. Let me just make sure it's still raining an hour later. It can't possibly rain all day. Maybe you get down to depression and confusion. Oh, it's totally raining. There's nothing I can do about it. This day is ruined. Okay? Many of you have probably been there. And then maybe you move into acceptance. All right? It's raining. Let's just deal with that. Okay? Once you've accepted that it's raining outside and you cannot have your picnic outdoors, maybe you problem solve with a shelter, or you relocate your family to your house. But you had to go through all of this other stuff before you could get to problem solving. Now, for some of you, you get outside. I'm from Wisconsin, so we go through this denial and change curve about the weather every 24 hours. Every day I wake up and I can't believe it. So you go through this. Maybe this takes you 8 seconds, right? 1 second per phase, and you're off with your day. It's no big deal. But if you've been doing a job the same way, you're really good at it, you're confident, you go to work and know what you want to accomplish, and then you hit a change, this change curve can take months to get through. So it's really important as a leader or a manager to acknowledge where your staff and where your employees might be throughout this change curve as you're going through an organizational change. I recently worked with a company, and I'll use a few examples from them, who went through an acquisition. Now, that was huge. They're about 10 or 11 months into this acquisition, and people are still kind of stuck down here, right? They know they've been acquired. They don't know what to do. How do I get my job done? And they still kind of go back and forth. But it's just important to provide support. So that's why this course really starts off with the individual and how you can support them through the change. One of the things that the focus of the course is learning. And how do you get people through this curve by providing them with learning, ways to, rechannel some of this depression or eliminate the confusion so that you can move them faster through. So learning is a big part of it, and that's covered more thoroughly in the course. So I wanted to show this change model because I think this one is the best one. It's my favorite. This is Bridges' model, and he talks about change as 3 phases. And when you're organizing change, it's really important to accept and distinguish between these 3 phases. So first you have endings. Okay, so let's say you're moving away from a huge legacy system. Some people have been working on this. It's older than half of your staff. They've been doing this for 30 years. It's important to create an environment where people can express an ending. So they're letting go. So yes, maybe that legacy system is horrible and makes everybody's life complicated, but people have dedicated their time to this and their livelihood. And so just to throw it out like trash is really, can really upset people who have been working on this project. So by saying we're going to let go of the old ways, we celebrate what everyone has done, this is what we used to do, and this is what our veterans have done, and we're so proud of that, and to celebrate and acknowledge that something is ending, again, acknowledging that a death of some sort is happening, that the change is happening, is the first step in Bridges' model. Second step is the neutral zone. And again, we go over this more in the course, but this is basically a really squishy time. People aren't really sure what to do, and it's important to allow them in the neutral zone to create workarounds, to find new ways of solving problems, to acknowledge that things may take a little bit more time, and just to acknowledge that you're in this weird space and you won't stay there forever. So once you get through the neutral zone, you really are looking at new beginnings, and this has 4 Ps, and I really like this because a lot of times we're great. The 4 Ps are written down here. When you plan a change, again, with that technology and process piece, we're good at a plan, right? We've got Gantt charts and spreadsheets and calendars that will mark our plan, and we really are good at that in most organizations. Sometimes we have visuals. We've got, marketing stuff up on the walls. We know what the end state is, and we're providing visuals of that. So we're sometimes really good at that. But sometimes what we miss out is the purpose. So what are every individual's purpose so that they can feel part of the change? And that is really the fourth P, is part of the play. So in order to really get people through that change, they have to see how they are individually responsible, something they can master, and how they can really contribute. How many of you have heard of Daniel Pink? You can give me a green check. Very famous TED Talk about motivation, and he talks about 3 things of motivation, and it's in the book as well, is autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So really this section is to get people motivated, you need to give them the ability to do their job, the mastery of doing it, let them do it on their own, and then also that purpose piece. How is their job contributing to the future? So this is the change model. So that's basically where we're at with the individual. Now we're going to talk about change in the organization. So this is just another model, separate mostly from individuals' needs and mostly about how you get an organization through. And this is Lewin. This is a tried and true model, 1951, and this is 3 phases. So unfreeze, change, refreeze. So basically, it's very similar. You've got an unfreeze where we're changing the status quo or getting people to think about things differently, and then we're changing, and it's important to go back to a refreeze because people cannot sit in change forever. It's just too much for everyone. So refreezing, so finding about those new habits and establishing those pieces. And in the course, we talk more about some of the different ways of motivating people to get through this. So there's things like the carrot, so rewards, the stick, so punishments, and then the last one is burning bridges. because sometimes the only way to get an organization through a change is to eliminate the old way of doing things. And we talk about that as part of this model as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about drivers of change. This is also from Lewin. It's a force field analysis. And basically, the picture shows you have status quo. And there's always two forces pushing on that, because we're not constantly changing. And we're not constantly reverting back. So what we've got here are driving forces that are pushing us towards a new desired state and resisting forces that are kind of holding that change at bay. So I'm going to give you a little example from IT, and then we'll talk about an example that I think most of you can relate to. So if you've got an IT change, let's say you want to introduce a new system, it's important to identify your drivers for change so that you're not just changing for change's sake. You need to have these reasons and vision in front of you for change. So maybe for this, it's you're getting customer complaints, errors, the system is causing staff frustration, or you're missing shipments, or people are working overtime to maintain it. Those are all really good reasons to change. But as a change management leader, it is so important to also focus on your inhibitors to change. And doing that up front will save you so much time later, because you will face these. These are what people will say as reasons not to change. And you have to be educated and ready for that discussion, because you can't just look at things from one point of view. It just makes, it's just a non-educated point of view, and it doesn't make you look good. So as a change attendee, you really need to look at both sides. So here's some inhibitors. So these are some of those resisting forces. We've got the disruption and the cost. We don't have time to change. We're doing so many other things right now. And these are all valid and need to be examined. And then this one I really like is the devil we know. A lot of people would rather just stick with the change and the disruption and the problem because they know the workaround. They know how to make it work, even if it frustrates them. And maybe that change is a little too daunting. So you really need to identify these so that when you start making your plans, you can do what you need to do to resist or to eliminate these resistors, or at least reduce them. So let's go to this example right here. How many of you have ever moved before? Let's see, let's get a green check if you've ever moved, ever relocated. I'll give you a moment. Yeah, so almost all of you have moved. So if you were going to identify some of those driving forces for moving, let's see, it's probably a little hard to share. You can either put it in the all Q&A, or you can just think about them in your head. But some of the reasons for moving might include more space, moving to a nicer neighborhood. It could be you've got a family expanding. You need, handicap accessibility because you have aging parents. But there's a lot of good reasons to move. Then there's probably a lot of reasons that you went through for why not to move, right? The cost. Or something as simple as, I don't want to pack boxes because I really don't like packing and unpacking, okay? Those are all real forces that are keeping you in one location. Now, if you did all that thought process of what your driving and resisting forces are, okay, you've thought about it. This is good because it's going to save us money. And even though it might cost us money in this side in commuting, we're going to have a nicer yard and we'll enjoy our weekends better. You may have great ideas, okay? But if you took those ideas and never discussed them with other stakeholders and went to your significant other or your teenage children and said, we're moving, it's going to be great, and let me tell you why. These are all of my driving forces and all of my resisting forces. What do you think would happen? I hope that some of you out there are chuckling because absolutely nothing would happen. You have to consult your other stakeholders in a change and understand what their driving or resisting forces are. Because that resisting force of a senior in high school who doesn't want to leave their school district may outweigh all of your really great driving forces. And so the timing just may not be right. So we'll talk more about stakeholders in the next section. But this is a really good tie-in to why you need to consider those stakeholders, because they may have some really powerful driving forces that really push you and give you that momentum you need. And they may also have resisting forces that you need to acknowledge, accept, and really move on from and mitigate, specifically mitigate, in order to have your move or your project or whatever your changes be successful. Okay, so that's kind of where we go in the book about talking about the organization. So let's go now into some of the stakeholder engagement information here. So something that the textbook does, and you will definitely see if you've done project management courses or other sorts of training, even Agile, I believe, is stakeholder segmentation. So go ahead and give me a smiley face if your organization does some sort of stakeholder assessments on projects, or if you as a team leader do some sort of stakeholder segmentation. We're getting a few smiley faces, not as fast as people who move, but we're about halfway there. That's great. So let's talk about some of the different ways. The textbook gives you multiple ways to segment stakeholders, and I've only pulled one. This one is a pretty popular one, and then there's plenty of other examples. You probably do something very similar to this in your organization, but again, no organization does it exactly the same, and there's plenty of ways to accomplish this. So this one talks about just 4 key groups, and then you probably want to segment lower into each group. But we've got governance, which is pretty simply an internal HR, or it could be regulatory. And then you've got the customer. So thinking about what your customer may want. I like this example of Facebook because it was a pretty epic fail. How many of you can go ahead and we'll move back to that green check. How many of you remember when Facebook changed their timeline feed? You remember that a few years ago? Everyone was happy, you logged in because you were going to post about this new dish you made or your kid's soccer accomplishment, whatever it was, and all of a sudden it was different. You didn't have any notice, you didn't have any choice. All of a sudden, bam, your Facebook timeline feed was different. And maybe some of you remember how the market reacted to that, and it was not good. Facebook had to sort of retract. They gave you a date, so you had until a certain date that you could switch over to the new timeline. You could opt in right away, but they had not thought about what their customer would do with this great change that they were implementing internally. And so if you don't think about that and get some feedback from customers, you can really find yourself down the wrong trail. Influencers, this is pretty obvious, but I want to point out one key piece with influencers, and that is that a lot of times we think of influencers as people with power. However, that power does not necessarily have to be a title or status. So yes, influencer, absolutely, your key stakeholders, your board that you have to get approval from, those people are influencers. However, an employee who's been at an organization for a long time and has earned the respect of other employees, or kind of a assigned leader, right? There are people that just have this sort of reverent power within an organization. Those people are influencers, and you really want to identify them and get them on, the side of change and helping the change move forward. Because if you don't, they have a lot of power to derail what you're doing. So this is one that I like to point out. And then we have providers. So if you're going to new software, that's the people providing the software or the support. So those are pretty obvious. You need to figure out what they need as communications and things as you go along. So the book also gives a lot of ways to map stakeholders. So it's great to identify them, but really what you're trying to do with identification is manage. And what we do in the course is talk about seven principles for identifying and then managing the relationships of your stakeholders. This is just one two-dimensional way to identify and map your stakeholders. Very simple. You've got power and influence on the left. You've got your interest on change on the right. So go ahead and give me a smiley face. How many of your companies map your stakeholders once you've identified them? Any kind of mapping. Or do you just kind of have the groups? Okay, so we'll get a few smiley faces, a few no's. Yeah, there's a yes and no. So maybe yes is if you do. Good. So what's great about mapping is you can do a couple of things. Number one, you're trying to figure out where people are right now. Okay, so maybe you've got some workers who they've got a high interest, not a lot of power, but they're going to be using that financial system every day. You really need to keep them informed. And those would be some active players. But maybe you've got a key board member or C-level executive that has a lot of power and influence and isn't really interested in your change. sometimes those people end up right here. But really, where they need to be is right here. You need them to have a high interest in your change in order for the change to happen. And you need that visibility of a leader and make that person into a change agent of sorts throughout your project. So in mapping, you can see where people are and also where maybe you need to do a little work to get them to move to another box. Okay? So that's one of the benefits of mapping. There's lots of different ways to map. Empathy mapping, what are people thinking and feeling? Personas, a lot of organizations use personas, which they'll name. This is our typical finance analyst, and this is what they're thinking and feeling. Those are all just different ways of mapping and managing your stakeholders. So I really like this one too. So why are we communicating with our stakeholders? I mean, what are we trying to accomplish? So in communication, there's really a spectrum. So when we talk to people, people can either feel, this is survival, right? You either feel rewarded, you're like, yes, this is awesome and I can do this. Or you feel like your life is threatened. Again, basic human nature. So when we communicate, what we're trying to do in a change, which already has people feeling a little off balance, is to move them from seeing this change as a threat to seeing it as a reward and understanding where that change fits within their work and their life. So what happens when people see the change as a threat? And this is really common in early stages. This creates uncertainty because there's too many unknowns. If there's not enough communication, then people don't know what to expect. And really, not knowing is worse than knowing and being unhappy about knowing. I think for most situations, if you think about it, that's true, right? You'd rather know and be able to deal with that than not know. So this comes from a lack of information, and you're constantly having new things to deal with, because even if you don't communicate that change, or even if you think your staff are not talking about it, they're absolutely talking about the change. And they absolutely will find other places to get information. And those places of information may not be true, and they may not be the resources that you really want. So what this does to your bottom line, again, business value, is these people become anxious. They think less clearly. They're less motivated. They're spending their time trying to get information from others instead of getting their work done. Or even a worst case scenario, I think, is they're unable to get their work done because there isn't information about the change and what they need to do differently. And this just really affects your productivity, which again affects the bottom line. And not to mention workforce engagement, motivation, and just general office morale. So when we communicate well, what we do for our staff is we create a sense of certainty. They know things, and they can feel confident and trust that you are going to keep them informed. They also regain a little sense of control. So going back to Daniel Pink, that's that autonomy, right? The thing that I can get things done on my own because I have the information. So that's really important. People feel like they're being listened to. So in the next slide, we'll talk about two-way communication and some best practices. But this is huge in change. If you just push out information, trust me, it's going to be great. Here's some information. You're going to lose people. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we make as leaders is to say, oh, they don't need to know that yet, or we'll get to that, or I'll figure out what they're thinking a little bit later on. When you move people and you give them the right information, you do make them willing to learn, right? They want to do well in their job. So they want that information and they want to change so that they can do better. And giving them key information and giving them an opportunity to engage will increase motivation in your staff. So these are some of these pointers. I really like this slide. It's in the book. Some just 6 factors to encourage engagement. And this fits in with some of the other topics in the book, which I'm leaving out today, but it goes into great depth, a full chapter on developing your communication plans and communication strategy, which most changes already have. But what the book and what we do in the course really go deeper into how you incorporate a change management approach into that communication plan. And these are some of the best practices. So don't wait until full information is available. If you wait till you know everything, you'll never know everything. So people don't know. It's also important to create two-way interactions. So that can be face-to-face, it can be feedback, it can be surveys, it can be lunch and learns. We go into a whole slew of options in the course of what that can be. And then you need to consider the impact to the changes, to the individual. It is great to lay out a change, and maybe some of you have been there. You can give me, let's see, what do we got here? You can give me a smiley face. If you've ever had an executive or a change approach to you as how great this change is to the business. It's going to do this for our customer loyalty. It's going to do that for our customer loyalty. A lot of times we're great at talking about those impacts, but what we're not good is breaking it down into those stakeholder levels. So this is what the change means to you. Your job will change. You will need to use these new project management documents. You know, really making sure your communications go down to that level and providing specifically managers support to talk to their staff. Because one of the things we talk about in the course is that managers are some of the best conduits for communication because they have that daily contact and they know what the style is, they know where their employees are in that change curve. So if you can create communications in part of your project planning that supports that flow of information downward, that really helps out with the change management. So you also want to target your information, right? We cannot have email overload. You know, find the right distribution method. Really think about that. Should this be email? Should it be an explainer video? Should it be, you know, a Word document or PDF guide of how to accomplish something? Making sure that information is put in the right way to the right people at the right time. And then allow time for people to process, right? So often a decision is made that doesn't affect the, you know, maybe a staff level member or even a manager or senior manager level of an organization until months after that decision is made. And so as a team leader or an executive or wherever you are in the organization, you have to remember that you also went through that change curve. And you've had maybe 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, maybe 2 years to mentally prepare yourself for what this change means to you. And so allowing your staff to also go through that is so important. You know, a lot of times leaders get frustrated. Well, look at all the benefits. Like, why is everyone upset? Why are we still in anger and denial? Why are people trying to quit? And a lot of times it's simply because we haven't acknowledged that they need to go through the same process we already went through. So allowing time is really important. And then encouraging feedback and acting on it, or specifically acknowledging that you got their feedback. We did a survey. This is what it said. You know, quick visual. 85% of you, big green smiley face, are happy. 15% of you have no idea what's going on. Red, you know, sad face. And we're going to work on that and dive deeper into this. You know, a simple "I heard you" makes a huge difference. So again, we go way into this communication and stakeholder engagement more in the course, but these are some of the high-level things that I like. So just a few minutes left. We're going to talk about change management practices. So this is really about assessing where you're at for change. Are you ready for it? And then also sustaining that change throughout, you know, the weeks and months ahead. So as you look at change, you're looking at big pieces such as impacts, so people, process, technology that are impacted, and also the risks. What happens if this change goes badly? What could make it go badly? That's really important. And then business continuity, because you cannot put, you know, a full stop. You need to be full steam ahead, even in a change. So how do you maintain that business continuity? And we talk about that a lot in the course. So we're looking at scope and severity, things like that. And we're also performing a variety of assessments. So some of the ones that we talk about in the course that are pretty easy to grasp are changeability. Do your people have what they need to change? Are they able to do this change? Are you really asking them for something that we don't have the groundwork laid for yet? Looking at an organization's history of change. It was so great. I was meeting with a client, they're a nonprofit, and we were talking about some of the changes they were going through. And they said, you know, acknowledged right up front, we are really bad at change. We have a bad history of it. And they acknowledged it's because of their culture. They have they do not have a culture built in of training people through change. And they recognize that. So even something as simple as a new printer causes mass chaos because they don't have a history of creating a guide or emailing people out beforehand or doing some of the other simple things that could be done to alleviate and just make a really smooth transition. So acknowledging what your organization does well or poorly is important. I also worked for a company that did a reorg, and a lot of people left. It was very, very stressful. A lot of people left, didn't know what was happening, and so when they went 3 years later to do another reorg, luckily they're an organization that learns from their mistakes, and they took a lot of feedback that they got from that first change and incorporated it into some best practices for their second change, which was amazingly smoother. They did not lose nearly as many people. Most of the people who left were ready for retirement and made that choice. There was a lot less anxiety. Surveys showed, engagement and morale were so much higher, even though they were essentially doing the exact same change. So looking and learning from your mistakes is really important. And then also looking at individual responses, right? Because change has to happen at an individual level and a team level before it can come to an organizational level. So looking at what people are saying and looking specifically at those different stakeholder groups, because they're all at different places. So looking at that is really important. So this is we're getting towards the end, and a really popular comment with change is, well, how do I deal with people who don't want to change? So there's 3 ways you're going to tell if someone's unhappy. The first one, pretty common, this is I think is the most common, which is audible unhappiness. This is the eye rolling, the sighing, the slumping in the chair. You can really see people do not want to hear what you're saying. Then there's also disengagement. So these are the people who are just, yeah, okay. But you ask them to do something related to the change. You come back to the status meeting a week later, and they haven't done anything. They're not really engaged. And then we've got the saboteur. This person I really enjoy. I think they're your best advocate, just fighting on the wrong side. This person is actively trying to make sure your change fails, right? That means they've got the energy and they are caring enough about your organization that they're being vocal. Sometimes people are malicious, but I don't think that's most of us. So I think the saboteur is someone who's really interesting. I'm not going to get that done. I'm going to withhold information because I don't want them to be able to get what they need to get done. So these are the 3 different ways you're going to see resistance. So let's talk about what causes that resistance. This is from Cotter. I think almost everyone in this room, if you've heard of change management, you know who Cotter is, 8 steps of change, all that, which is also part of the course. But this is he identifies 4 different reasons for resistance. And while these are sort of your, what you're seeing, your symptoms, these are really the root causes, these 4 symptoms. So let's look at the first one. That's self-interest. So that is really saying, this change doesn't benefit me, so why would I do it? I'm not part of that group. I don't use that system. Why do I need to go through all this work? So it's really self-interest. So helping people see their part that they play, we talked about that earlier, that will help them move past self-interest. Different assessments. So this is someone who says, yes, we need to change, but I don't think we're doing this the right way. So again, going back to that individual and communicating to them how your change is going to address the real problem is important. And then also listening, right? Because these people may have really good points. A lot of times they're in the trenches and they're looking at you saying, that is not going to solve my problem. So listening to some of these different assessments is a great part of change management. So then the third one we have is low tolerance. Some people just don't like to change. I'm comfortable, the devil I know, concept like that. And for these individuals, we talk about training and learning and getting them through the learning cycle of feeling, really incompetent to back to competence and conscious competence. And then the fourth one is misunderstanding. So these are people who don't understand what the change is after all. They're spreading false rumors, so you've got to stop that. Find those people, right? It happens all the time. So you need to make sure that your communications and your strategies are really addressing all of these things. This is the what's in it for me. We heard you, and this is how this change is going to solve a problem, right? These are the driving forces. And then low tolerance, we're going to make it easy for you to find the new information and help people get through that. And then lastly, really being clear about what the change is and what the change isn't. And having that plan will help with misunderstanding. So all of this everything ties back together. Even though there's 4 different sections, we're really trying to get to one common place. So just to summarize, and we'll get to some Q&A, it is great to have a business plan. So many organizations are great with business plans. You've got your technology process piece. You filled out your charters. You know what you want your change to be. But if we can just combine this business plan with this soft, fluffy, how are people feeling? How do I get them through? Sort of change management side, what you're ultimately going to have is save time in your change, save some energy that you would spend just pushing or pulling people forward with you, and that really affects your bottom line as an organization. So that is the presentation, and I'll have Ted just kind of come off mute, and he can let me know what sort of questions we have for today. Thank you all very much.
Great job, Veronica. That was really, really well delivered. So just real quick, before we go into the questions and the answers, we do have a few questions. This was just a small part of the change management class. It's a 6-session, 4-hour class, which really dives into a lot of this stuff that Veronica went through. So it's a great class. So let's get to some questions. And I was just putting them all down on a nice sheet for me so they were easier to read off. So one of the first ones is, do you need a human resource background to be a change manager?
No, I don't think you do. And there's a lot of roles that we talk about in the course, such as being a change agent, change manager. Really what I think you need is empathy. If you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, you will be a great change manager. A lot of times that role can fall under business development or can be a formal role in HR, but even just putting on your change manager hat as a project manager or even as an IT lead, what are the future users of this need to know? Anyone can be a good agent for change and incorporate these practices no matter where you are in the organization.
Awesome. Let me get to the next one here. Somebody has a question about the refreeze and how it works in companies like LinkedIn where they use an Agile methodology.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of times what we're talking about with an Agile methodology is, you're constantly going through those changes. And that does create a sort of, just constant sort of mini disruptions every once in a while. But really when we look at the refreeze, what we're looking at are those bigger changes. So as you're developing, your refreeze is going to happen kind of when you close out that project or that new software implementation. Those mini changes, not such a key part, but even establishing best practices to make sure that every time you do a new release, you're communicating, doing some of those things, that will make your refreeze happen quickly. And the smaller the change, I think sometimes the refreeze is just, not such a big deal. It can just happen really fast. But for a big project, you're probably talking more about when that system is really in its first phase. And the refreeze also, let me say, is about following new processes too. So when you've kind of got to a refreeze, when people are not using their old workarounds, they've acknowledged that there's a flow to maybe a system or a process, and they're using that approach now, the approach you kind of designed in mind with that project. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. That was a great question.
Awesome. So we have 2 more, and this one is, how can you influence change while working as a change manager in a state-level government agency? In government agencies, it takes months even to do a small change.
Yeah, okay. So influencing change, and some of the things we talk about in the book are the different roles and how those tie together in change. So maybe you're a line agent, maybe you're a change agent, maybe you're a stakeholder. But some of the things that I think are great, especially when it takes so long to get something done, is being a great change agent also involves networking. So if you're in some place that it takes a long time to get something done, then a lot of times the communications are spread out or the meetings are spread out. So if you, as a change agent, can maintain those networks and keep an open ear for what's happening, I think you can add a lot of value in those scenarios by just keeping kind of the network alive and not letting that project sort of fall away. That's one idea. Another thing is just to remember that some changes are fast and some are slow. And so just keeping with revisiting some of those pieces. So your stakeholders and what they need will change over a multi-year project. And so making sure that you understand that change management is not static. You will go back. You will want to look at new stakeholders as new requirements come up and just kind of keep that refreshed in everyone's mind. So there's no reason why, you know, a good review, hey guys, we're 2 years in, let's do a little review of where we're at and let's remind ourselves why we're doing this change, I think is a great, just a quick meeting to have or organize so that everyone can still keep the momentum on their own projects. And good luck.
And then here's a couple more. We have about a few more minutes, so I wanted to make sure we answered as many questions. And if we don't get to your question, we will have the question sent over to Veronica, and she'll write up a little blurb on pretty much all the questions, so just so we can recap them. But here's another one, Veronica. According to your experience, what is the very first step in the change management process?
I think it is acknowledging that change is happening. Just saying, this is a change. People will be affected, I think is the first step. Because sometimes like a new printer, this isn't a big deal. No one, you know, everyone will be fine. That is when you start to derail. So the first step for me is always acknowledging, you know, getting people to agree, yep, we're changing something, and this will affect people. And so you're almost, if you find yourself in that situation, asking leading questions, right? Is this going to affect people? Do we need to communicate how things are going to change? Should we be creating documents specifically about what's changing? You know, kind of just asking innocent questions. And maybe the answer is no, but I think just acknowledging that a change is happening, what are we going to do about it, what are our next steps, is really the first step in the process. And then in the course, we kind of delve into where things fit. So you may be in a project, right? And you don't want to just say, okay, we'll do change management with the next project. This is a great course, fantastic. Looking at your project plans and saying, you know, does this affect a certain stakeholder? We'll probably have some communications already planned, you know, in a robust project plan. Who's messaging that? What stakeholders is it going to? Is this the right time? So there's a lot of ways that you can kind of implement change right at any point in a project. You know, are we acknowledging, does this email acknowledge that people are going through struggles? We know it. We know so much, right? You walk the halls. You know when people are frustrated. You can tell in their body language and how they respond. So I think just acknowledging them and their feelings at any stage in a process can also help you with change management.
Awesome. We have another one here. It says, obviously change is inevitable. How do you ensure your organization profits from change? And then the follow-up question on that is, does your team need certified change managers, and should you pursue a change management certification? I know those are...
Okay, well, yes, of course, we're here. Yes. You know, do they need a certified change manager? Unless they were, you know, came out of the womb knowing everything about change management, they probably don't need to be certified. But I think I needed a course, and there's nothing wrong with brushing up on, you know, new ideas. So I think there's a huge benefit in education, and whether that person gets the certification or just does the course, everything that you do will help you become a better change manager. And so, yes, I love education. I think people should take courses and really then spread that knowledge. But even if, one person starts off with that course and then does an hour lunch and learn on Cotter's 8 steps to change, you're starting. You've already started to become a change agent, and you'll bring other people in. But really, when everyone is trained in the same concepts, you get a lot faster buy-in. And that's really important to remember. Because how many of you have gone to a conference, you got an awesome idea, and then you come back and nobody knows what you're talking about, right? That happens to me all the time. You can give me a green check if that's totally you. Yeah, you're like, I want to do something cool, and then nobody has the time. But when everybody goes to that conference and everyone sees the value, it becomes a priority. And so I think there's a huge benefit in training the team. Okay, and Ted, what was the first part of that question? I got distracted.
No problem. You got so excited about answering the last two. It's how do you ensure your organization profits from change?
Profit, yes. It really depends on the level and what your company values. So if you're talking about profit in a monetary state, that can be using change management to implement faster. If your organization's core values are about employee engagement or employee satisfaction, using change management to make changes easier and keep that motivation high, that could be profit for your organization. So it's really about understanding where you're at. Now, depending on what level you're at, ensuring is a tough word. I think some projects will ensure more profit than others. But really that force field analysis, understanding what your driving forces are so that you know, are we doing change for change's sake, or is this the right move? Because if you aren't even changing for the right reasons, you're probably not going to get the profits or ROI that you're expecting. And by identifying those resisting forces and mitigating them and knowing what they are and attacking those so that you can keep those driving forces having momentum, that will really help move you towards a level of profitability. Certainly couldn't say it ensures it, but it absolutely makes a huge difference when you acknowledge that there's risks and resistance and use that along with the driving forces to get yourself to that future state of change. I hope that helped. Good question.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Wanted to say a couple of things about Omnicron and what we do here. If you're not familiar with the company, so we do training on things like big data, negotiations, DevOps, and of course change management. A lot of our students that we train use their company's tuition assistance program or tuition reimbursement program. We have our learning and development representatives that can help you select the perfect course for you, walk you through your tuition assistance or reimbursement, depending on what your company has. And a lot of our trainings our students take with no money out of pocket because of this company benefit. I have included my email in the chat area of this webinar, but we will also be sending out follow-up, not only a survey, but an email for anyone that wants to talk to a learning and development rep. We also have some webinar series that are coming up, so save the date if you're interested. We have a big data, brand new class that's coming out, which is incredible, although a little bit over my head. My eyes start crossing and my head starts spinning when I hear our presenter talk about it, but it's a great course, and I've learned a lot myself. We also have a negotiations class, so a negotiation for business, which are techniques from an FBI hostage negotiator, and then we have a DevOps class coming on webinar coming on July 18th. I really appreciate everyone's time. Veronica, thank you so much for your time. It was incredible. And everyone have a wonderful day. I have recorded this, and we will be sending out a link to the recording. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Veronica.
Happy to talk about change management anytime.
Thanks, Veronica. Bye-bye.